Welcome everyone. I'm Sam. I'm an aspiring furniture builder, an aspiring beer brewer, and in my spare time I'm the Director of Sustainability at Development Victoria. Before we kick off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this exciting and special event is being hosted. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. I was lucky enough to attend the opening night here last Friday night, where Jifa Greenaway gave an inspiring and, I would say, kind of, not perception changing for me, I think, opening to the event. His words focused on regenerating country and the principle that if you care for country, country will care for you. This is the underpinning of sustainability and what we're in the middle of, a new normal. We should reflect on this as we hear from our high calibre lineup this evening. I was humbled to be asked to host this event and also really excited. I've been lucky enough to take on the role and be embraced by the team at Development Victoria of Director of Sustainability over the last 18 months. What I've seen is the themes we're about to talk about tonight, so water, energy and food, are reflected not only in the actions of the whole team and how they deliver, but what they deliver and that they deliver. Whether it's a master plan community at Knox, an urban renewal project in Fitzroy, the Melbourne Arts Precinct, development in Docklands, or a major sporting facility, the team at Development Victoria have shown exceptional passion and leadership in embedding the tangible outcomes for the people that live, work and play in their developments. There are a few of the DV team here tonight and friends of DV, and we're all looking forward to the insights from our high calibre lineup, as I said, but also learning what we can do to help get these projects off this roof and into reality. We have behind us, and about to take the microphone, Mark Jakes, who will be talking to us about the project on water treatment. Mark is an urban designer and landscape architect. He's the director of Open Work, which he founded in 2016 as an office undertaking projects in public space, landscape architecture and urban design. He's also Professor of Architecture, Industry Fellow within RMIT's School of Architecture and Urban Design. We have Nigel Bertram. We're rating them on how loud the applause is before they even speak. Who's going to be talking about suburban stormwater? Nigel is founding director of NMBW, the practice professor, at architecture at Monash University. Nigel established the firm in 1997 in partnership with both Marika and Lucinda. His current research with Monash tests design-led process for suburban regeneration and infill development, seeking new relationships between natural and human-made systems. And finally, but definitely not least, we have Daniel Tatton, who I've been lucky enough to work with in my role at Development Victoria. He'll be having a chat to us about urban agriculture. Dan is General Manager of 3,000 Acres, a not-for-profit with a mission to help more people grow more food in more places. 3,000 Acres' current projects range from growing a giant sunflower field in the CBD to negotiating leases for community gardens and working with cultural and linguistically diverse groups to grow traditional crops in Melbourne's climate. Dan has a decade of experience in policy, strategy and project management across the not-for-profit public sectors. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Sam. How do I move the slides forward? Are you moving slides forward for me? Oh, great. Oh, with this, that's right. Thank you. Thanks, Sam. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly pleased and finally relieved to be here. I'd like to tell you tonight about a problem that Melbourne has with water, and tell you a little bit about a project that we've been working on that helps solve that problem. Essentially, the problem is that every year the city drinks enough clean drinking water to fill Eureka Tower 1,000 times over. That's 2 3/4 Eureka Towers a day of drinking water consumed. And that's a lot of water, clearly, and Melbourne Water is forecast that we could have water shortfalls as early as 2028. After all of this water is consumed, it's pumped to 2 sewage treatment plants that are hours away from the CBD. We treat that water and reuse only 16% of it. 84%, the remainder, is treated and sent to the ocean. Other cities around the world capture this treated water and reutilise it for drinking, irrigation and other needs. And if people have had a chance to see the exhibition before being here tonight, you'll see in the water closet that Nigel and I occupy, there's a video of people from those cities, London, Singapore, Perth and others, who are drinking recycled, treated black water and sewer water, and they are happy and healthy and in many cases very good looking. And it's high time that we in this city follow suit. What we're proposing to do in A New Normal as a project is to increase the reuse of treated water by increasing the amount of water treatment plants in and around the metropolitan area. So not those 2 locations outside of the city, but in the spaces that are all around us. And the sites that we're speculating on in this project are the underutilised infrastructure of the city. The car parks, the leftover space, the infrastructural space that's no longer fit for purpose, and other slack spaces that generally sit within existing buildings. So this isn't a top-down initiative where we're asking for a huge build to reconsider infrastructure on a metropolitan scale. It's much more small scale and distributed. It seeks maximum impact for minimum investment. Great. The project emerges from 2 observations. The first is that there are thousands of underutilised basements and car parks across metropolitan Melbourne, and we're, in this project, looking for just 1 to get things started. The second observation is, in fact, that water can be cathartic. It's no coincidence that movie makers use rain scenes like this to dissolve the barriers between lovers, or to move characters to a cathartic realisation, or to get a character to surrender to some sort of greater, higher truth. In many ways, the meta brief, or the brief that sits underneath the New Normal, is to find ways of using immersive experience to get people to change their attitudes about resources. And in this instance, we want to get them to surrender their fear of treated sewer water. The point here, I suppose, is that the technology to treat sewer water and to reuse it as drinking water is not revolutionary or sort of mind-boggling. It exists. The barrier is people's perceptions of what it is to drink that water. This challenge, one too soon. This is a challenge to encourage the general public to embrace treated water in their daily lives, to normalise the treatment of wastewater to a drinkable standard. So the pitch within the book that many of you have is to use the young and adventurous as early adopters and advocates for this change in perception. The prototype that we're developing in the project is called the Water Tank Club, or in a more mischievous mode, the MCC, which stands for the Melbourne Cistern Club, which is a pilot project located notionally under the bleachers of the MCG. The project takes untreated water from the building, roof and plaza of the precinct and filters it through a series of pipes and tanks that form the walls of a void space under the concrete seating bleachers of the G. Clean, treated water is stored in tanks that are lit from beneath and used for drinking, swimming and misting, making the air wet and making the ceiling drip and creating a moist cathedral to celebrate performance, leftover space and hydraulic engineering. There's another idea in this project, and that's to say that for people to change their behaviour around the use of resources, they need to be able to see where their resources come from and go to. And I guess our position is from, well, certainly from my point of view, there's no more secretive art than hydraulic engineering and plumbing. There is, it's literally the idea that you turn on the tap and you see the hole in the drain, but there's no spatial connection between those two things. You don't understand where your water's coming from and where your water's going to. And in order to change that, our attitude toward water use, we need to change our perception of what happens between the tap and the drain. So we'd like to change that by making the mechanics of water collection, conveyance and treatment clear to everybody so that the consequences of what happens when you turn on the tap are known to everybody. And then in this instance, by turning it into a spatial performance, we breach the barrier between the physical body and the support structures which make the body work. So this list of 3 points is all we're asking of people in general, you tonight, and people who can help us. Give us your dead space, a basement or a car park, and help us install a water treatment facility in that space that might be developed as a club or a social space that brings people in contact with the water cycle. And there's a little bit there about $4 million that would be useful too. I sort of want to zoom out a little bit and anticipate a discussion that we might have later on, which is to speculate about how some of the strategies that are in the book and the exhibition that are around us will change the shape of the city and how the way that the city works, how it will affect those things. And what this kind of approach suggests is that we move from an autonomous services to a shared infrastructure. So here on the left-hand side is a diagram of a typical block in the Hoddle grid. Generally, between 50 and 80 individual allotments, often in dislocated ownership. Each of those buildings, or each of those allotments has a booster cabinet, a car park often. Sometimes if they're hotels, they have a dodgy pool. There's a sense that each of the buildings are islands infrastructurally in terms of the way they use resources. What almost every project in this exhibition does, and in the propositions in the book do, is to sort of speculate on what a shared infrastructure might do in that space. There's a speculation that says, what if the 80 separate booster cabinets and water service cupboards that we see in a typical block within the Hoddle grid are consolidated into a precinct-based water treatment plant, and those existing service spaces, and often the car parks that they sit within, are liberated to be redeveloped as spaces that create a higher value for activation, commerce and exchange. The outcome will leave future generations with a more cost-effective, more secure and high-quality water supply. And to achieve this, we must engage with the people of Melbourne and engage with treated water in new ways. And Ross's great kind of, unsung byline of this project is that it's about connecting technology with culture. And that's really interesting for us and essential in changing people's perception about water. What's been clear about the reaction to this exhibition, which notionally uses misters of recycled sewer water behind you to irrigate plants and to humidify the air to cool it, is that when people read the sign with the sort of disclaimer saying that we weren't actually allowed to do it because it's against the law at the moment, there was a sort of social media backlash saying how ridiculous this is. So the idea that perceptions are changing are already, there's evidence for that, which is really fantastic. And then obviously with the builders, when they were building it, they weren't too worried about it either. Together through pilot projects like this, we can turn our water problem into an incredibly exciting opportunity. Thanks. Nigel.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Green button goes forward. All right. Our suburbs, I'm going to sort of lead on from Mark and talk about more sharing and more kind of water. I think there are lots of common themes in the group, and the exhibition is about making it fun, making it kind of cultural and social, not just technical discussion. So with that in mind, I want to look at the something we spend a lot of time doing, looking at the suburbs of Melbourne, and they're a bit of a mixed bag, I'd have to say. A mixture of old single houses, poorly thought out units, a bit of average high density infill housing, scatterings of interesting cultural and community facilities. They have all the ingredients of a sustainable city, but they need to work a lot harder. There's a lot of spatial capacity and proximity, but very little organisational connectivity. The structure of the suburbs, and this is because the structure of the suburbs is atomised into a multitude of individuals that tries to get tied together by the collective organisation of government at a very large scale. So down at ground level, the streetscape of these kind of places, which make up about half of our city, what we might call the middle ring suburbs, is dominated by vehicles, not just the car objects, but all the associated infrastructure and space that goes with them. And there's a lot of talk about car-dominated streets and so forth, but we want to get into the kind of mechanics of that. So the crossovers, driveways, space, invisible space for turning circles, all of these things have a huge impact, and the regulations around them a huge impact on the final built outcome that we all live in. So the proposition is if we could collectively rethink and reorganise this space to be more efficient and more performative, huge opportunities might open up in terms of amenity, the way we live, and the way we relate to each other and to the infrastructure and the environment without a kind of full-scale structural change. So this small street in this project, this visualisation, has made a simple decision, one decision that triggers everything else. The residents have agreed to park their cars at the end of the street in a secure shared parking space and then walk the final 100 metres to their house. So that seems like a pretty sort of simple thing to do, but what it does is it unlocks a whole raft of other possibilities. So a small personal behavioural change or adaptation, agreeing to park and walk or park and ride or something, it allows benefits that we want to explore. The benefits are immediate and long-term, and they cross multiple categories. Energy, waste and water can be renegotiated at street scale. Reduced traffic allows for more permeable road and driveway surfaces rather than concrete and asphalt, dramatically reducing the burden on the city's ageing water infrastructure and allowing local water retention. Verges rewilded with native species further treat the water for reuse. The things we normally do in garages, which we associate with cars and driveways, including workshops, storage, gardening equipment, can be rubbish collection and storage, are all able to be rethought and perhaps collectivised or perhaps not. It's not mutually exclusive. Without the fixed dimensions of the car and its turning circles being the key determining factor in the spatial layout, buildings can be more flexible to respond to human and environmental needs. More density with better design can be incorporated much more easily if parking is separated from dwellings. So a few practicalities, in case you were wondering, and there are some people who have contacted us from various streets who are wondering about the practicalities. We want it to be real. Grouped parking can be secure and undercover, with solar panels on a carport roof that could charge electric vehicles if they were electric, or an array of carts and scooters that could be used to ferry goods and people around. Battery storage from PV cells could power public spaces, local lighting and bike and cart charging. Access can be maintained to all dwellings for emergency vehicles and maintenance and so forth. The waste system could be rethought at a street scale, ensuring efficiencies of scale and the sharing of bin storage, compost, recycling and repurposing. All of this can be socialised and agreed between neighbours. And it might seem idealistic, but if you can imagine the power of a collective unit like a body corporate that works for good, and a lot of body corporates are very painful experiences, but they're an example of a middle-scale organisational unit that can collectively work together and agree to step forward and try things out. So we're rethinking surfaces, rethinking drainage and infrastructure to help the local small-scale unit affect the large-scale city. So the most important thing is that the main ingredients are already there. This proposal could be thought as renegotiating the software of the suburbs or rearranging the loose and invisible organisational elements so that we can see new opportunities and relationships. The buildings and titles stay exactly where they are. Elements such as existing trees and leftover spaces can become nodes around which the new street infrastructure and new landscape is planned and built upon. To prototype this concept, we can do low-cost, short-time trials to get live feedback, to exchange ideas and feel the new spatial practices, to smell the new landscape and to appreciate the new acoustic qualities such a street would bring, not to mention new cultural practices that might evolve. What is clear is that we can't rely solely on centralised or trunk infrastructure or centralised government services to meet all of our needs, either for utilities like water itself or for the organisation of people into effective and timely action. The answers need to be more distributed and bottom up. They need to be self-sufficient in different ways at different scales. A small suburban street of around 20 dwellings is a good scale to initiate action, large enough to make a difference and affect change that is meaningful to daily life, but importantly small enough to agree on something and move forward to test, adjust, test again and refine. So we're looking for streets and groups of around 20 residents to test and develop this idea and see how it evolves. This is not a fixed concept or a one-size-fits-all. We'll cooperate with residents to develop a local concept. We'll also collaborate with councils, water utilities, emergency services and other stakeholders to make sure their needs are met and look for further areas of mutual benefit and innovation. We would work across department silos towards a holistic and integrated arrangement, where the natural system, health, social and economic benefits are intertwined. We're seeking funding to refine and prove up the first version of this system. We need space for grouped secure parking, plus infrastructure. We need landscape interventions and so forth. But importantly, perhaps most importantly, we need permissions and agreement, which is something like the soft, invisible stuff that architects and designers are often unable to have direct contact with. Once this is established and road tested, the concept will be replicable and adaptable to many situations around Melbourne. Although each suburban location is unique, the middle suburban pattern is actually highly repetitive, so the issues repeat over each suburb. So we can have a bespoke design for each location to do with the residents' particular physical and structural relationships, but it can be easily adapted to other locations. So please come to us with your street's potential and your neighbours' agreement or interest. Please come to us with financial support to develop and test a prototype. Our aim is to show what's possible if people work together cooperatively to solve the issues on their own doorstep. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I have a cold, but COVID negative, just to put you all at peace. I'm just going to probably change a bit of what I was going to say, just because I've observed a few early themes already. I think compared to some of the other new normal projects, there's less emphasis, I think, with our 3 projects around technology and upfront funding. It's more about allocation of resources, changing behaviours and attitudes, I think, which is, I think we can probably talk to a bit later. Thank you, Nigel and Mark. Sam mentioned a bit about 3,000 acres. We work in what's called the urban agricultural space with some really good, innovative, dynamic urban agricultural scene in Melbourne. Another organisation, Sustain and Street and Cultivating Community. Melbourne's a real lead nationally and internationally as well. Much of our work, though it's urban ag, has just been about accessing underutilised land. So it's not that there's a lack of demand, but it's matching that demand with space that is you can use for people to grow. So usually for us that's been the community garden level, for example. But we've got a few larger examples. For anyone who goes on the Mernda line, that's Victoria Park Station, and that's a community garden, kitchen garden that was set up by Fair Share, the food rescue organisation, and we negotiated a lease with VicTrack, I think it was, just to enable that. So that's kind of the level. But just for tonight, we thought we'd scale up just that concept of accessing underutilised land, or land that's been utilised but we think has probably got a higher use public value if we use it for agriculture. So tonight's less a resolved concept. We're late to the new normal party, but this is more in the way of a provocation, just to question the choices as a community we've made long ago about how we allocate our resources, in this case land. But just to get a specific concept, wouldn't want to build any suspense, but we like the idea of converting Melbourne's golf course land, at least some of it, to multifunctional agricultural parks. So I'll get to that. So the challenge, I think the 3 big challenges that this concept is trying to address, and urban agriculture addresses more broadly. The first is the increasing vulnerability of Melbourne's food bowl. There was a really good research report, certainly 5 years ago, Nick, called Melbourne's Food Bowl. It's led by Victorian Eco-Innovation Lab, Uni of Melbourne, Sustain and a few other organisations. And it talked about, and it just made the obvious observation that Melbourne's a city surrounded by its own food bowl, but increasingly urban sprawl is eating that up. So we're kind of, as we spread, and so as the availability of arable land becomes more constrained, the importance of city food bowls is likely to increase, particularly because they've got access to urban waste streams such as water and organic waste. I think more generally urban agriculture can play a greater role in strengthening the food security of Melbourne in a changing climate as well. The second challenge is agriculture-wide, increased production. We're going to need to achieve with the same production with the same or fewer inputs under conditions of land degradation, food loss and waste, increasing competition for land and water, and of course the uncertainties of climate change as well. And the third challenge we're hoping to meet is around food waste. Food waste costs the economy around $20 billion each year, the Australian economy. We waste about 7.3 million tonnes of food, and food waste accounts for more than 5% of Australia's greenhouse gas emissions as well. Urban ag at the level of community gardens and urban farms has proven to provide a great deal of benefit to the community. Healthy food, opportunities to socialise, educational programs, environmental services, jobs, cost saving, waste reduction, etc. But large production scale systems have been off limits, and that's been largely due to the constraint of land size and the absence of urban ag and planning of public spaces. So, onto the concept, that's the challenge. Sorry, I'll just put 3 of those actually. So this is a picture of, it's been in the news a bit during lockdown. It's Northcote Golf Course, which was opened up during the second lockdown for public use. So we want to introduce a new concept of integrating civic agriculture into the urban community. So we propose reclaiming large tracts of underutilised urban land for food production, and as part of that process, recycling organic wastes. And we think golf course land is a good target. So the idea would be that we'd convert golf courses to multifunctional agricultural parks, and they'd be laid with elements of agriculture, organic waste conversion, environmental services and green energy, as well as the sort of traditional concepts of community building, as well as recreational events and activities. And there's quite a few recent examples of golf course land being reclaimed for other uses. In Sydney, I think the Lord Mayor Clover Moore is pushing ahead with a plan to halve the size of Moore Park golf course to unlock more parkland. I think I might have gone too far. I've gone too far, that's all right, I'll go back. Sorry, that's a terrible resolution picture from Japan where they're reclaiming a lot of their golf courses for solar farms, for example. So it's all a bit of a part of a trend to kind of reassess what we're using our public and private land for. So the benefits of this project, composting reduces pollution, reuses organic waste, reduces the cost of agricultural production inputs, and more importantly, returns nutrients needed for food production back to the soil. It minimises the amount of external inputs for agricultural production, closing nutrient loops and reducing negative impacts to the environment. The multifunctional agricultural park would provide benefits in a variety of ways to many different people. First, the park would greatly enhance the capacity of public-owned lands to support a healthy lifestyle, and the parks would also provide fresh and nutritious food for those in need and exercise as well. Secondly, educational and outreach programs could arise from the presence of the agricultural areas and serve to educate the public in a great variety of possible subjects. Thirdly, an environmental ecosystem service could be implemented with nutrient recycling, i.e. waste management, microclimate regulation and stormwater management could all be provided. And lastly, the diversity of the agricultural growing spaces could provide space for culturally significant crops and production techniques. And certainly other beneficial outcomes to the realms of sustainable development, community building, culture, health, happiness can be envisioned as well. And just lastly, why golf courses? It's not a new class war from the inner north, but more than half, I just read this recently, about a month ago from Saville, property evaluation, a few other things. They had a report that said more than half of all Victorian golf clubs are in financial stress, yet they occupy land potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's, I think, probably private clubs. And if publicly owned golf courses are considered too much of a financial burden or fail to serve the public at large, we think it's time that these large tracts of land become available for repurposing. And I think change is going to happen anyway with golf courses. So we need to, as a community, start to think about what the best public use is, because a lot of them are already zoned residential. So as soon as, I think the one in Glen Waverley was sold for a few $100 million a few years ago. So we know what price they have on the market. We just need to consider what the best public use is, and we think considering agricultural parks a good use. Thank you.
Thanks, team. That was excellent. It was pretty excellent, right? All right. So to kick us off on a bit of a discussion, we're going to get down to business straight away, just in case anyone stopped paying attention. What we have around here, around us, is a physical representation of a body of work that's set out to basically take theoretical ideas, bolster it with evidence, make it financially feasible or economically feasible, and then actually physically implement it to realise the outcomes. So again, just in case anyone missed it, for each of your projects that you just presented on, what's required to take it from rooftop out into the real world?
I'll start. just somebody said pretend you're throwing around house hook, but so let me know if you can't hear me. I thought I'd just go first because just to continue on from my point, there's a big question of policy here. As a society, as a community, land use is about a judgment about what we value and what value we want to allocate to land. And so the golf course question and the fact that there are already default planning and zoning sort of overlays in play already, we need to make a conscious choice, a conscious policy choice about what we're going to do. Otherwise, these things will just default to privatisation or just, I think there was a recent release, 21-year release of Yarra Bend public golf course as well. So I think we need to have the debate first, and as I said, we're less of a resolved concept. So we need to have a public debate about what value we want and need to have, and what land use has the highest value for the next 50 to 100 years, because it's not the same value and use as we had for the last 100 years as well. And then I think once you found a few sites that you thought were viable, there'd be a whole lot of just basic research around the appropriateness of the soil, etc., and a few other things as well. So site selection, but I think it's not a sexy one, but the policy one is the key, and we need to make government aware that they need to make a choice, otherwise something will happen negatively by default.
Thanks, Dan. Nigel?
A group of 10 or so residents who are willing to work together and a council who's willing to play along. That's all.
Simple.
And a bit of money, a little bit.
Hands up. Anyone? We'll come for you later. Mark?
Look, I think our needs are easily met as well, in a sense. I mean, we're really asking for people to find spaces that are currently lazy. So a lot of the basement spaces, leftover infrastructural spaces, dross spaces that are all around us, and in some senses, exemplified by this rooftop, which was nothing, and now it sort of sparkles. We're looking for those sorts of spaces, and they exist all around us. These buildings that are like that one have incredible basements that once held technology that was cutting edge in its time. Services have come along in great leaps and bounds, shrunk in footprint. There's a kind of leftover space, and that's the sort of space that we're after. That's one thing. The second thing is we want to borrow some money. There's a figure of $4 million in the prototype proposition that's in our project, for instance. But that project pays for itself within 6 years. So you're not giving us your money, you're just borrowing it for a while, and then you can have some more. And I guess the third thing is probably something a little bit less tangible, which is something, a kind of spark or a kind of disruption or something that makes people notice. I think in our project in particular, that's an important idea, that you would use some moment of excitement, maybe even mischief, to change, to make people notice and then force themselves to change their attitudes toward, for instance, inhaling treated black water. Those three things. It's easy.
Not that hard, guys. Come on. Dan talked about policy and Nigel, Mark, you both talked about, I guess, decentralised and shared infrastructure being key to some of these projects. Those two things don't regularly go hand in hand in this country or in this state, even overseas. Like, we've seen that disrupt things in Santa Monica and Los Angeles as well. Can we talk a bit about what we need to change from a regulatory standpoint, particularly for the water projects? Tough questions tonight.
Oh, it is a bit of a tough one. I mean, I think let's go with territory that I'm comfortable answering in, which is an immediate context that we're in, right? So the biggest problem that I think, maybe everyone's perpetual problem is the Victorian planning scheme. There's nothing in the planning scheme or in the way that the city is conceived that encourages this building to share with this building. They're totally autonomous. Therefore, the kind of shared infrastructure, exchange, shared risk, kind of discursive relationships that we're talking about in all these projects not only don't have any reason to exist, they're not permitted. So from our point of view, we'd be really interested. I mean, before the current planning scheme existed, there were kind of more spatial techniques or spatial tools that allowed parties within a city block to talk and negotiate based on things that were set within that block, largely sort of heritage elements and kind of through connections, etc., and things that weren't set. And there was a kind of idea that you would negotiate about a better outcome. It's those kind of conversations that I think we're interested in having in terms of metropolitan water harvesting and treatment, and a kind of rethinking of the provision of infrastructure as something that's state provided and that drips down, no pun intended. So I think that's an important one. I think obviously there needs to be, and it would be interesting to have a discussion with the EPA or water providers around what's stopping the literal use of recycled black water being used in public space, in drinking water, these sorts of things. Like, is it, as we expect or suspect, that there's a sort of marginal idea about an increase in treatment levels that is about the mitigation of risk? I think attitudes need to change in that regard as well. But I think there are these sort of hardwired policy issues that are about an attempt to control, not an attempt to allow negotiation.
I mean, just to follow on, I think the question between centralised and decentralised is not a kind of either or, and it needs to be always a combination. And as Melbourne grows and is growing and is experiencing both infill and greenfield growth and kind of transitional growth where industrial land moves to different uses, that there's a kind of, there's an existing, which was really 19th and early 20th century infrastructure, which reaches a kind of capacity and needs to be upgraded all the time. So I think the proposals that both Mark and I are talking about are kind of about small closed loop systems that work locally that augment and take pressure off the big centralised system. They don't kind of replace it. And so that kind of combo of decentralised and centralised systems means that you can delay costs of upgrading big trunk lines, and the answer is not just a bigger pipe each time the capacity increases. The answer can be a sort of cleaned out existing pipe and a sort of soakage pit or a package system. And I think that kind of combination of package system and trunk system is something that's well understood in, I don't know, air conditioning cycles or other kind of ways of thinking about things like storage and so forth. So I think it's not really a regulation that has to change. It's an admitting that, or maybe it is. Maybe it's a organisational thing again. It's about departments and authorities understanding that there's multiple answers at multiple scales. Many of authorities often do. And particularly in the street example, the street's a very contested space, right, as everyone knows. Like, everyone's vying for a bit of it and wants a separate conduit through it. So if the idea of the cul-de-sac or the small suburban street that gets blocked off means that maybe you can have a kind of dead-end loop that could work differently that doesn't affect the workings of the big street. So could you have a combination that was intelligently organised, that a little bit of a deviation or a little bit of a weird effect on the dead-end loop could coexist with another system in the main system?
Perfect. And I think a couple of things that came up there were particularly around, it's not just one solution, it's not just a siloed approach. And given tonight we're talking about energy, water, urban agriculture, instead of looking at, and we shouldn't look at these 15 projects or now 16 projects as siloed projects and siloed investments, is there opportunity to have these or some of them developed or built or outcomes realised in symbiosis? And do we think that would provide even further benefit, be more cost effective, be more space effective?
Totally. I mean, the New Normal project is a project that has little components, and the argument that Ross and others are making, and we all are making, is that you need to think of the city as a whole and look at its total consumption and then break it down into little bits. And these 15 projects or 16 are examples of some of the chunks that you can chunk it down in. I think they're totally co-locatable.
I think an optimistic way of looking at it as well is that all of these things are unavoidably interconnected. And it's almost as if we've got in our own way with some of this stuff, regulations, etc., that we keep feeling that they need to be separate. So I think that's the great opportunity, that we just need to remove the blocks. We don't have to create the bridges so much with all of these things. And I think the other great thing, shared thing here is probably just getting back to the regulations and that sort of thing. They're all at a small scale. They're all at proof of concept scale. And I think with having a government background, regulation is all about risk management. So if you can demonstrate at a certain level of scale your proof of concept, then it's informing their assessment of the risk. And I think that's the opportunity here as well. So,
Mark, do you have anything on that?
No, I just would agree furiously with both of the points that were just made. I think there's a sense of the 15 plus 1 projects that are within the document and around the exhibition almost being sort of Trojan horses to garner excitement or the attention of particular audiences, but really. The attitude toward everyone that's involved is that it is of course a holistic exercise. They're inexplicably linked and codependent.
I love how calm you are when you're furious. It's great.
I'd love to see you calm, Mark.
There is a project as part of a New Normal that we haven't touched on tonight, and it's the Latrobe Valley proposition, which I think is quite an interesting one. And given we are talking about, infrastructure and land, how do you think the themes and projects you've talked about tonight and the proposition for the Latrobe Valley project can support the rehabilitation of Latrobe Valley?
I might go with that one first because I don't have a lot of particular knowledge or sort of skin in the game in terms of Latrobe Valley, but I think the things that strike me as its major potential are things that have been talked about very specifically tonight. One is the idea of a higher value use for public land, which is very much in that last presentation and Nigel's, or the idea of using slack space or underutilised, underperforming land to a higher calling, and that seems to be all about the rebirth of the Latrobe Valley. The second thing I think is this idea of that's sort of talked about a little bit in our project, which is this sort of catharsis. And I guess the opportunity for Latrobe Valley is to sort of look at the idea of ruination, or how the industrial object might be sort of so emphatically remade that it creates a bit of a tension. So I think that that infrastructure that's there already is incredible. It just needs to be tipped over into something else. And there are some really great examples around the world of where, for instance, Emscher Park in Germany, where the industrial object or the kind of industrial precinct is just left, is let to sort of fall back into the land, and that the land becomes this kind of delirious public space that's all about a totally different scale, totally different occupation, totally different time sense. So I think all those things are within these projects. They just need to be scaled up.
Yeah, I think the Latrobe Valley as a whole is a sort of the epitome of ageing infrastructure, right? The whole entity it's a landscape, it's an infrastructure, and importantly it's also a society. It's all the towns that have sprung up to service that, and the jobs that are in those towns, and all of those elements are kind of in some state of decay. So to me, it's actually like a similar thing to looking at something like the middle suburbs, which is also sort of unloved and sort of not very glamorous and in need of reinvention. So that state of decay or sort of tending towards ruin is actually a huge opportunity, because experimentation, I mean, it's a little bit like saying you haven't got much to lose, right? So you can try things out and see if they stick. So I think trying out new things is going to be much more exciting and feasible, and kind of maybe getting community behind it in an area that is not in a rapid growth situation and under pressure of competing uses. So I think it's a... and the last thing I just want to say about Latrobe Valley is that it's a kind of it's a symbolic and physical space as well. Like the Latrobe Valley exists in everyone's mind, even if you couldn't draw a picture of it. It's something that we all imagine as part of Victoria's sort of the way it's organised. So that, therefore, it has a great potential to redefine something bigger than itself. If we can reimagine the Latrobe Valley in a new way that's both functional and social and symbolic, it could have a transformation outside its boundaries. And that's why I like the proposal in the exhibition of the solar farms mixed with sheep agriculture, because they fit under the solar panels or whatever the combo is. It's a nice, convenient fit, and it could have this experiential quality. It becomes able to project an idea that's bigger than its own boundary.
Dan, do you have any thoughts for us?
It'd just be to extend, I think, Nigel's observation about symbolic value, but also practically, it is the symbol of the old economy, Latrobe Valley, and the old way of resourcing our society as well, and arranging it as well. And we know it doesn't work anymore. So, that's the opportunity. We know that we can't do the same things. That's not going to be the route for renewal for Latrobe Valley, and that's where we come in, I think. That's where the new economy, new ideas around how we do things. I think that's the great opportunity in Latrobe Valley. So,
Excellent. Well, there you have it. It's not just about warm and fuzzies. It's about everyone making a little bit of money, reutilising some dead space. And I just want to thank our panellists, Dan, Mark and Nigel, for their presentations and sharing your thoughts with us tonight. And also Ross and team for getting this up and running.
thanks,
So,
Miles.
again, thank you all. Thank you everyone for your attention as well. And please grab Ross, grab our speakers, and have a chat about how you can help get these projects off a rooftop and into our city.